look at all the people here tonight. Hi, welcome to the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. My name is Bernardo Rondell, Senior Director of Film Programs. Hello, good evening. I'm so happy to see all of you here tonight. This is a truly amazing and special evening. I never could imagine that as a little boy growing up in Brazil, watching these films in theaters, one day I'd be able to stand on the stage to present these films with the people who made it. It is such an honor to be here. First and foremost, I want to thank a number of people and entities that made this screening possible. A huge thank you to Disney, Fox, and Lucasfilm for their support of this screening. Please give them a huge hand. Also, a huge thank you to our security team led by Jerry Perez. Please give them a huge hand. And then an enormous hand, please, to the theater ops and projection team led by Ethan Colbert. So we are here tonight as part of a series called Branch Selects. Who has been here for a Branch Select screening before? Please applaud. Okay. The Branch Select series is we go from A to V in a way of the 17 Academy branches, A from actors, V to visual effects, in that we're working with the Academy branches every week to select a film that is unique to their craft or that is exemplary for the kind of thing that they do. And the visual effects branch has already chosen Citizen Kane, which we screened earlier this year, and their second title is Star Wars. Woo! After the screening, we are going to have an amazing discussion with John Dykstra as well as Richard Edlund. Both of them worked on the film. John Dykstra was the visual effects supervisor. Richard Edlund was the first camera. And that will be moderated by author and visual effects artist Craig Barron. I know that all of you are here because you love Star Wars. I know that all of you are here because you love film. We are showing this film on 70 millimeter. This is an extremely rare, unique, and fragile print. Any film screening has a risk of a potential interruption due to a tear or something of that nature. So just be prepared. We're going to do our best to get through this show, but if there are any hiccups, I will come back out to talk to you folks. But we are going to do our best to get through this show. And of course, this show would not be possible without the Academy Film Archive. This print is courtesy of the Academy Film Archive. They are truly the blood of our film programs. We could not live without the amazing work and the amazing collection of the Academy Film Archive and its preservationists and its curators. And to speak a little bit more about the print we're about to see, I'd love to welcome the director of the Academy Film Archive. Please welcome Mr. Michael Pogozelski.
Thank you, Bernardo. It is absolutely thrilling to be introducing this print to all of you. Bernardo just wanted me to spend a quick 5 minutes because you already know this is going to be a unique and extraordinary evening. I just want you to know a little bit about why exactly it's going to be unique. And Bernardo nailed it already, 70 millimeter, right? Twice as big as 35 millimeter. And even though most of the original prints of Star Wars went out on 35, 70 millimeter prints were made for big cities like the Chinese Theater here in Los Angeles, New York, Dallas, Chicago. And 70 millimeter, the movies would be blown up because of the second reason that this is an extraordinary and unique print, the 6-track magnetic stereo sound. The 6 tracks on this print, each is, originally each was dedicated to a specific speaker behind the screen. Originally there were 5 speakers behind, and then the 6th track would provide the surround information for the speakers on the sides of the theaters. Star Wars was one of the first films to change that channel configuration. So now one of the stripes is going to the left speaker, one is going to the center, one is going to the right, one for the surrounds, and then the remaining 2 tracks colloquially became known as the baby booms. They're the bottom, the bassier part of the track to increase the playback or increase the fidelity in during those sequences. And the third reason this is extraordinary is because of the color. Now, all of the prints of Star Wars went out on Eastman color film stock, which is an engineering marvel. They developed a way to layer 9 layers of emulsion perfectly on top of each other to reproduce the entire color spectrum. But from an archival point of view, the system, while it is an engineering feat, has one terrible flaw in that the dye layers start to collapse onto one another over time and the prints begin to fade. Now, the layer closest to the base of the film captures the magenta portion of the color spectrum. So that's why all faded Eastman prints look pink. Pink skies, pink grass, pink, pink, pink. So sadly, that is what happened to every original 70mm print of Star Wars. It's completely pink by now. They're all pink, if they exist. The good news is in 1979, Kodak started experimenting to create low fade color stocks, and after 3 years and some different iterations and tinkering, they developed a low fade stock that they rolled out in 1982 and began to be used throughout the 80s and even into the 90s. This print was made on that stock, so that means it's not faded at all. It looks as beautiful as it did when it was first struck, and the color will be very close to what you would have seen in an original Eastman print. And then the final reason, Bernardo, that this is going to be awesome is what he mentioned is that this is to honor the achievements the visual effects team of Star Wars were able to create. So this is what audiences saw and heard in 1977. I will add my own voice to Bernardo's to offer a heartfelt thanks to all of our colleagues at Disney, Fox, and Lucasfilm for giving their blessing for this screening. Now, as Bernardo said, there is a catch to this awesomeness. There may be an interruption to the awesomeness because there are a few tears in the print. One that comes near the beginning-ish and one that comes near the end-ish. And the one that towards the end-ish is very long. It's over 40 frames, which is about 2 seconds of screen time. So we here in the theater are going to have to come together to either cross our fingers, use whatever force powers any of you have, or clap like we're keeping Tinkerbell alive. But we are going to get this film through and have an amazing screening.
Thank you so much, Mike. And of course, as Mike mentioned, we are here to celebrate the achievement, the visual effects achievement of this film. I'm about to introduce a key participant in that, Mr. John Dykstra. A little bit about Mr. Dykstra. After studying industrial design, John Dykstra landed a job working with visual effects innovator Douglas Trumbull on Silent Running, where he made model effects. When George Lucas was recruiting people for the special effects work on the original Star Wars film, which we're seeing tonight, he approached Trumbull, who pointed him to Dykstra. Dykstra led the development at Industrial Light and Magic of the computer-controlled motion capture camera system known as the Dykstraflex, that was responsible for many of the film's groundbreaking effects. Dykstra won 2 Academy Awards for his work on Star Wars. One which he shared with John Steers, Richard Edlund, who will be joining us on stage shortly, Grant McCune, and Robert Blalock for Best Visual Effects. He also received an Academy Award for technical achievement for the development of the Dykstraflex camera, shared with Alva J. Miller and Jeffrey Jeffries. He received a 3rd Oscar for Best Visual Effects for the film Spider-Man 2 in 2005. Please welcome Mr. John Dykstra.
This is apropos. I've been invited out here to do the introduction of a film that I think we all agree probably doesn't need any introduction. It's Star Wars. So, you know, I worked on the visual effects aspect of Star Wars, and frankly, production of Star Wars was a little insular. Different departments were separated by an ocean. They were working in Britain and we were working in America. And other separations occurred. So we didn't have time to be attached as quickly or as accurately as we'd like to be. So I can tell you a little bit about the visual effects side of things. I could tell you a lot about it, but we're going to keep it a little bit at this point. And but I don't have a real understanding of all of the mechanisms and all of the things that transpired in the rest of the production. So I'm going to stick with the visual effects, and I think it's probably representative of a lot of what happened in the first Star Wars. I got a script in 1975, and it was The Star Wars, and it might have even been The Adventures of Star Killer, I'm not sure. But the script came with an invitation to go meet Gary Kurtz and George Lucas. So we went and we talked, and of course the script was illustrated. At that point it was presented with illustrations by Ralph McQuarrie, which were absolutely stunning. And the script itself was great, and I was a pilot and a visual effects photographer, and it was full of dogfights in space. So how much better could it get? And so we went and we met and we did a lot of talking about techniques and did a lot of hand flying and discussing how things could be done. And what came to the fore was that in order for this film to be exceptional, we had to find a new way to present his idea of this vision, of the idea of keeping the audience on the edge of their seat and keeping the audience engaged and willing suspension of disbelief. So, of course, these were pretty high bars to get over, and being young and dumb, I immediately said, oh, we can do that. So they agreed, fortunately, Gary and George agreed, and we set about making a facility because the existing facilities weren't operational at that particular point in time, and we knew we had to do a lot of new things to make this imagery be unique. So we built a facility out in Van Nuys in an airport, and there was a lot of technology there. There were computers that we made from scratch. There was a model shop. There was a machine shop. We were building cameras. We were making motion control systems that used hardwired computers to duplicate moves. But the key to it, and I think the thing that's most important when you watch this film, is that this movie was made, at least the visual effects part of the movie, and I think the rest of the movie to a great extent, by people who were engaged because they loved doing it. I mean, we didn't have a big budget. We certainly didn't have a luxurious environment. And the people who came to work there had two things. One is they had a common purpose because we were people who had collaborated on other jobs in other environments. We were people who were really in love with the idea of making this kind of imagery and coming up with innovative ways to enhance it. And they were people who really cared about one another. The facility that we had out in Van Nuys was, we were there, there was somebody there 24 hours a day. You know, we were all young, so very few people had families that they had to deal with. So it was a very much a familial situation. And, you know, there was sort of this great hive inventiveness that went on. People from one department would be knowledgeable about the workings of another department and would share ideas that would advance things. And that was the key to, I think, the success of this film, in the sense that what you see on the screen is the concentrated and willingly given genius of some of the smartest people I've ever known, and they did it for the love of it. And I think that shows in the picture. So I'll let you ponder that while you watch Star Wars. Thanks.
Did you guys enjoy that? That was amazing. Thank you so much to the projection team for an amazing job. Before I bring out our illustrious panel, there's a little piece of video we'd like to share with you to give a little sense of the amazing work that went behind the scenes in the making of this film. And this reel here was directed by Brooke Breton, based on a reel she previously designed for SciTech Council's Galactic Innovations Program. Editing was provided by Melody Smith, M Factor, and Van Ling. Enjoy this little 2-minute piece, and then I'll be right back out to introduce our panel.
With Star Wars, I knew what I was up against. At that point in time, what I wanted to create was impossible, with special effects. I had no idea what I was going to do.
Your destiny lies along a different path.
It had to figure out how to make it cinematic. It had a lot of movement on the screen. But there was a lot of resistance, whether it's money or how to use technology that moves people.
What if you take a look around? You know what they're up against?
This is madness.
Help me, or what can it be? You're my only hope.
Who's the more foolish? The fool or the fool who follows him?
That's where the fun begins.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Mr. John Dykstra. Before I welcome our next guest, I'd like to give you a little bit of his bio. Richard Edlund is a cinematographer and visual effects director. He became director of photography and founding member of the embryonic industrial Light and Magic for the production of Star Wars, for which he received his first Oscar. He won 3 more Oscars as visual effects in The Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Return of the Jedi, as well as nominations for his work in Poltergeist and Ghostbusters. Please welcome Richard Edlund. And last but not least, please welcome our moderator, Academy Award-winning visual effects supervisor, lecturer, and film historian, Mr. Craig Barron.
Okay, are we all on? Yes, we're all.
Does this work?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think that holds up pretty well. I was entertained. How about you, everybody?
It's holding up better than I am.
I want to just, put this into context because when I first saw this film, I was, interested in movies, and I would see every movie that came out. But this movie was so far above anything else that was happening in 1977. The years before 1976, we had some films like Logan's Run, which was a science fiction movie. But when Star Wars came out, this was just a level way above what was going on. And so some of the things that I think is interesting to talk about is, why this film is so great from a visual effects standpoint. And of course, some of the technology that you developed, for example, motion control, people didn't do their shots that way. So tell us a little bit about, the approach and how aware you were of wanting to sort of take things to the next level, because you really did.
Well, look, it gets technical pretty quick. It's almost all
That's
technical.
okay, we're the visual effects branch.
Okay. So the deal is, during exposure, things move. Traditional stop motion photography takes a series of sharp stills. In other words, the object doesn't move during exposure. If you take a photography, a real life photography, the subject is in motion the entire time, moves while the shutter's closed and moves while the shutter's open, and you get a blur behind it. And one of the things that you saw in this film is the motion blur that comes as a result of this movement during exposure, which tends to link the frames together in a sense, a natural sense, so it doesn't look steppy. The other thing was the flexibility of motion. One of the films that I truly enjoyed, was influenced by it heavily, was 2001: A Space Odyssey. And the signature thing for 2001: A Space Odyssey, along with glacially slow moves, was all the moves were linear. The ship would move this way and the camera would move in on it. There were no accelerations or decelerations to speak of. And that was because the systems at that time weren't capable of changing speed, because changing the speed of the system changed the exposure of the camera. So we came up, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, but the thing about 2001 was the models were like 30, 40 feet long. So they were not miniatures, really. I mean,
There were maxitures.
one of the decisions that I think that we had to make was make the models small, because we had to shoot so damn many of them.
Well,
We'd never finish the show if they were big and heavy.
Here's the deal. If you got a stage that's 50 feet long and you got to make a model go from a pinpoint to full size right next to the camera, you build a model of a specific size to make that happen, because you've got to move the camera. I don't want to get into that right now, but the displacement between the camera and the model is based on the size of the model, in terms of how big it gets in frame. The smaller you make the model, the smaller the stage you can shoot on. This was a relatively low-budget movie when it was made. It would be comparable to a $50 million movie in contemporary terms. So it was almost like an indie. And so we were really stuck with trying to figure out how to make this work within the confines of the money. So smaller stages, and as a result, smaller miniatures, meant that we could shoot. We didn't require as much space or as much lighting. Or
One of the shots that got the biggest hand
You just have to let these guys go.
was, huh?
Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, one of the shots that got the big hand was after this hyperspace shot, which was a test I shot and sent it to Jordan and cut it in, the test.
One thing,
But
go ahead.
the next shot was the Millennium Falcon zipping off into infinity, but we couldn't get that far from the ship on the stage, so I shot a Polaroid, color Polaroid of the Millennium Falcon, and did a pullback on it. I mean, it was like a $2 shot, but the thing is, that's one of the wonderful things about movie making, is when sometimes the cheat really works.
You mentioned 2001 and the models. I think the Discovery
Yeah.
was 54 feet long.
Yeah.
The opening shot, or the early shot of Star Wars, you know, when the Star Destroyer flies over, obviously you grab the audience with that first shot. Everyone is amazed by that. What is the scale of that model? How are you photographing that opening shot?
It's interesting. I mean, the Star Destroyer we had was 42 inches long. And George would come by and he'd say, you know what, we got to build this model on the wall, and then, you know, and he'd go on and say, we can have this, ladders and things like that. And I said, but George, we only have a 42-foot track. And then we change the subject and we go off. But when we were starting to get towards the end of the shoot, and I realized we didn't have the opening shot yet, and I realized also that if we didn't have the opening shot, we didn't have the movie. In other words, the opening shot had to really grab the audience in such a way that they believed what they saw, and it's like the suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And I did a test. I had Grant make a Millennium Falcon about the size of a cigarette and stuck it on a piece of wire on the front of the ship for a test. And I did a test. I shot it upside down, by the way. I mean, the model's upside down, and so the camera's hanging over it. And it took a while to get it to where I was just scraping the surface of the model with a tilting lens to enable the focus all the way sharp. And the next day we were all pretty amazed. It worked.
It worked great. I have some slides, and since we're talking about some of the technology, it might be good to show a few things.
Sure.
So let me just sort of get those started, but what was your thought?
Only this, the concept for the facility was based on bringing together all of the custom camera modifications and camera movement systems and lensing systems that the group of people that were assembled had experienced over time. So in the old days, we built for visual effects stuff, a rig for a shot, and then a rig for another shot, and a rig for another shot. Each one of them had a very unique and special nature. And usually you just abandon that rig when you did your next version of the shot. The facility and the motion control camera system was designed to be used a versatile tool, meaning it could be used for a broad variety of things. We had a very specific application, but it included things like a tilting lens board, which is not conventionally put on a cine camera. The idea of motion during exposure was really important, but it also allowed us to do weird things like have a 360-degree shutter if we wanted, because the pull down took place separate from the exposure. And we're running at very slow rates of speed. The numeric control system that duplicated the move had to be, we had to make it accurate enough that you could run a camera through a complete three-dimensional move and duplicate that, put two exposures on it, and look like it was done as a single exposure with no shift or displacement of the images. So there was a huge amount of R&D that went into it based on projections that we'd made initially based on what it was we were going to have to find to make this movie have all those things happen. And we built a lot of stuff on top of that, but a really key part of this was the collaboration of all of the people within the shop. You talked about working with Grant, you talked about working with Ed, you talked about it. We had Don Crumble, Doug Crumble's father, we had Dick Alexander, all these people who were individuals and had their own areas of expertise, but also overlapped into other areas. Grant was a photographer. He understood the aspects of photography. Bill Short, who was a mechanical effects guy as well as an electronics guy. So it was an interlacing of a group of people who had a common goal. And again, like I said before, these guys weren't being, this was This wasn't a big paycheck. So they were there to learn from the other people who were working there and to contribute to a fun product that they saw as exciting and satisfying end result.
And that's what you achieved. Let me show you a couple slides. You had mentioned Ralph McQuarrie in your opening,
Yeah.
and I wanted to kind of touch on some of the things that made Star Wars so different and unique, and that was certainly some of Ralph's contribution. This sort of idea that in science fiction movies we were always looking to the future, but the used future was really something that kind of added a lot of value. And I think that kind of comes from Ralph and George, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, sorry. Well, yes, but if you think back, I mean, 2001 was pretty pristine, but Silent Running, we had aged spaceships. So the idea of aged space technology had been around for a while, and it's really a question of how you adapt it, how you use it.
Okay, so another kind of unique thing about observation of why Star Wars looks so different is that George did this sort of cut reel of World War II footage as part of the attack sequences. And so you had a reel to work with that was cut that represented real photography of airplanes. And you mentioned that you were a pilot. And so these spaceships are flying around like airplanes in outer space. That wouldn't really happen, but you gave it an energy and excitement based on this footage. I'm showing this little clip of some of the work that you had. So how was that when George sort of came up with this idea and said, gee, we want to do it a different way?
I'm sorry.
Well, a different way in the sense that in comparison to, say, science fiction movies in the past, like 2001.
Oh, no, yeah.
This is
yeah, I see what
usually,
you mean.
yeah.
Yeah, well, look, the idea of having a mobile camera was something we discussed from the very get-go. We wanted gun cameras, even before this element was generated. In the original script, that was the discussion. I talked about hand flying. It was all about having a camera platform that could move with the vehicle and having a high velocity, high energy environment. And if you think about it, the trench was kind of a way of getting you close to a surface so you could get a sense of speed. And when we were doing the dogfight material, just like the reference footage he had chosen, there was, generally speaking, something within the shot that was referenced for the speed with which they were moving, even if it was just another ship. So, yeah, it was his conceit for the energy of what he wanted to have happen, and it became a reference for the boards and what Richard and the guys shot out in the back.
Well, like the Spitfires were the X-Wing and the B-26s were the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
But and that gave us a sense of the kind of dynamic that he wanted the sequence to have. Then actually to program this was what I was doing every day, and you have to remember that if I'm programming it at 1 frame a second, or even slower in some cases. So I'm thinking at 1/24th of actual speed. and the whole thing, and this, the whole thing is that we wanted it to have the same kind of dynamic if it was some guy with an Airflex out there shooting all this stuff. Yeah. And it wasn't a camera on a platform that it was locked off or anything like that. Everything was fluid. The camera was moving, the ships were moving, and we had to crank out like 5 elements a day. And there was no time for reshoots.
One of the things that also, as an observation about this, is just the concept that it's really the camera that's flying by the model, and not so much the model flying by the camera. We have just like a little shot here that kind of shows that, is that you can see the camera's actually adding the movement.
Well, and obviously one of the reasons for that is that if you move the model, then you have the light changing constantly during the move, which doesn't make it not feel like space if you're using a single source light in a stage environment. So that was, it was just for lots of reasons, but the thing Richard's talking about was one of the really difficult things was figuring out the axes of motion, because it's relative motion, meaning whether the ship moves or the camera moves, it really comes down to the distance between them changing, whichever one you move. And doing that calculus was what these guys had to do on stage every day, because the camera roll wasn't the same as rolling the model, and you had to keep track of which things were based on the three-dimensional world in which the model exists and which were based on the actual axes of the model. So that's almost impossible to explain.
Well, I think you just did.
The thing is,
got it, right?
each shot was programmed, and then I would shoot a black and white test of the model of the shot, and so we'd have basically a black ship against a clear background, and then we would have another ship, which would be a black ship with a different move, and then we'd have to bypass those on the Vista viewer that we built. And so I think there was one shot where I had 7 pieces of film slowly running through this to double check how the dynamics of the various models worked against each other.
Another thing that you brought back was a sort of somewhat unused camera technology, VistaVision. You were trying to keep the quality of the image high.
Yeah.
And here's a shot of in London, George using a VistaVision camera to shoot the blue screen plates for the cockpit sequences.
Yeah, I'm sure under duress.
It was during the heat wave.
No,
it was 106 in London.
There was a certain amount of skepticism, you might say. But the idea of a bigger negative is, look, back in the days when we actually used to use film, and we actually put a subject in front of the camera and photographed it, the size of the negative you use determined the resolution or the amount of enlargement you could give it and still have it be satisfactory. And by using a larger negative, we ended up being able to duplicate the film, which degrades the image. But even with duplication, that larger negative then came closer to looking like the original negative, which was smaller, that was used for the rest of the film. So when you intercut the visual effects piece, its resolution seemed closer to the original photography, so it didn't jump. And in the old days, when they used to do effects in the same format, meaning the same size negative, as the original photography, and it got duped several times, it did look pretty ratty. You could really tell an effect shot because it'd get grainy and contrasty and just generally ugly.
We didn't have any double dupes yet. I mean, basically, the idea of using a large format, and then when we composite it, it reduces down to 35 and to 35 anamorphic, and therefore it doesn't. And because of the large format and the reduction, we don't have the dupe effect so much.
Yeah, you
So
get,
basically,
well, it's still a dupe one way or the other.
So basically, our
We didn't double
composites.
This is
Didn't double dip either.
a shot of the
But then everything gets double duped again. So when you see it in 70 millimeter, that's a double dupe.
I know. It's an IPIN. Probably. It's a triple dupe.
Okay, now I don't think the audience has it. But this is a photograph of the optical printer, and all these elements have to be photographed on stage, and then ultimately they all get recombined on an optical printer to make a new piece of film that has all those elements together.
Yes. Yes, not that ever happens now again ever. But
In a different way, but yes.
it's a different combination. But really important part of this, and Richard talks about it. If you look at this, every element that goes through the optical printer is being transferred onto a single piece of raw negative. That's the goal, is to make all of the individual components potentially shot at separate times that compose the shot, bring them all together on one piece of film so you can put it in a movie. And when you look at the elements, if the color elements generally are broken down into separations, and then there are other elements such as mattes that are run in conjunction with them. And even a simple shot with only 2 composite elements could end up requiring you to run 6 or 8 pieces of film through the printer. and they have to go through multiple times because you have to be able to check color balances and all of the other components that went with it. But what happens when you run that film through the printer is it scratches. And if you scratch one element, then you have to replace that element. And when you replace that element, if you're using separations, generally you gotta really replace all three of those separations. So you get to a point where
You're describing photomasochism.
yeah. But here's the best part of it. Richard built a printer where it had, what, 5 heads? Your 5-head printer,
quad.
but Ion.
The quad printer for Empire.
Oh, no, the quad printer, they had
4 heads.
So there were, and a beam splitter.
Use that
And he's
That was-
talking,
we
called,
built
telling
that
me a
for-
photo master.
Built that for Empire Strikes Back.
specifically for the asteroid sequence, right? We have all those elements. We're jumping to Empire. But anyway,
I think Ken Ralston actually shot a couple potatoes
some tennis shoes, yeah.
for the asteroids.
Oh, right.
Well, listen, you both have had long careers after Star Wars, where you went into the digital age as well. And you mentioned some things backstage, which I thought was very interesting about the idea of something in front of a camera has a certain quality to it that maybe you don't get as a digital composite. What is that?
It's a little woo-woo.
What is the woo-woo? Give me some woo-woo.
The idea that there's a thing about making movies that if you grew up with film, you remember that you make all of your decisions and you make your best effort to put everything in front of the camera because it's the only way you're going to capture it is in front of the camera, and then you execute. You do the take or the series of takes. But you didn't used to get to see that until the next day. And you got to see video and other things, but you didn't get to see the real end product until the next day. So there was a certain kind of mystery to the whole process. And there were fortunate mistakes and there were unfortunate mistakes. But those anomalies were kind of part of the filmmaking process, part of the, whatever you want to call it, the random number generator that is kind of part of every creative process that people are involved in. The idea of using oil paint and the characteristics of one kind of oil paint as opposed to another are not things that you can control as precisely as we control images, pixel by pixel today. And there's a part of me that wants all the kids off the lawn. But I will settle for a recognition of the idea that there's some kind of magic to the analog process. And it's true of sound as well.
Here. And you know what also is missing from computer graphics is serendipity. I mean, when you're putting something in front of the camera, sometimes things happen that you didn't expect to happen, and you learn from that, and all of a sudden the shot that you thought was going to be a good shot becomes a great shot because of some serendipitous thing that happens. And it doesn't happen when everything in the computer graphics world has to be input into the computer. So any kind of serendipity
Computers
doesn't happen.
Computers don't do dirty things well, meaning models and that kind of stuff, and they don't do noise well. It's just not part of its makeup.
Well, the magic is definitely in Star Wars. We're coming to the end of our time. I just wanted to thank you. I saw this movie when I was a kid, and I wanted to do visual effects, and Richard, you hired me to do with you The Empire Strikes Back, and I want to thank you for that. Thank you for Star Wars, the wonderful movie that got started, got my generation started in being interested in visual effects. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming, and I think that's about it for tonight. So,
Thank you.
Hey, look at those names to the left. They are part of the Skywalking Force, our Patreon. Become a producer yourself and check out all the Disney Plus themed bonus content available depending on the level you subscribe.
Become a member of the elite Skywalking Force at skywalkingforce.com.